Welcome to Close Watch, now a proud member of the Odd Pods Media Network. This is the show where we get to know our guests through the movies they love. I'm your host, Robert Yaniz Jr., and this is episode 26. As always, you can find more episodes of this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, and other podcatchers, as well as crookedtable.com. Ratings and reviews are always appreciated. Today, we're continuing our trek through the history of movie musicals, talking about 2001's Moulin Rouge. And I'm honored to welcome to the show Jennifer Howell of Every Romcom. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm really glad to be here today. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Of course. No, you and I have kind of been, I think we first started communicating over Twitter, which because we were never calling it X in this house. It is forever Twitter in this house. And then we've kind of been looking for something to collaborate on. I think at one point or another, and this just felt like a perfect fit. So tell people a little bit about who you are, a little bit about Every Romcom, and how that show started.
Sure. So every rom-com's been around for about 4 years. Like a lot of people, I started a podcast during the quarantine period, right? Because we wanted hobbies we could do safely, and we wanted something to, reinvent our lives, I guess, in a way. And I chose rom-coms because, I love all kinds of movies. Like, I love Tarantino, I love horror, right? But there's a lot out there already about
Yeah.
like horror. There's a lot already out there about movies that perhaps appeal to men more. I would say. And I felt that there's a little bit of a missing space. There are other rom com podcasts out there, mind you, but like our philosophy is we call ourselves the podcast that has fun taking romantic comedies seriously. And so, what I mean by that is we do a lot of research. We kind of analyze them from like a cultural perspective, sometimes like a feminist perspective. We also have a lot of fun. Okay. We do things like I think we did F Mary Kill Monster Edition on our warm body,
Nice.
for example. We do it's like a little bit irreverent at times too, but I really believe in taking the romantic comedy genre seriously, looking at it through the lens of film history, through critical analysis. We're not just like saying what we think about the movie, we're really trying to like dig into it a little more. And I mean sometimes that makes our episodes run a little long. So I will say that. Um but we
We've
watch
done 3-hour podcasts in my world, so that's no too long is not it does not exist with podcasts.
We do have like show notes and they show you like where we talk about certain
Right.
things. So I always encourage people like skip around if you want. If you don't want to hear us talk about Gene Kelly's career, skip to the part where we start talking about the movie he's in. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
we do Another thing we do double feature recommendations at the end of all of our episodes, like what movie would pair well with this movie. And that's kind of a throwback to one of my co-hosts and I, Sybil. We hosted a movie group in college together. And we'd put a
Oh,
lot of
nice.
double features together for that. So she kind of came up with that idea so we can leave some people with something to watch with the movie, to kind of play
Yeah,
off the world thing.
absolutely. No, and
Yeah.
there's an art to, just like, there's an art to making a playlist, there's an art to a double feature or a marathon.
Sure.
Like, you want to select things that are similar enough but not so similar that they step on each other's toes. Like, there's got to
Yeah.
be, what is your approach usually to that? Is it a thematic through line? Is it the filmmaker, some of the people involved? Like, how do you approach that kind of thing?
I mean, it really depends on the movie. Oh, now I wish like it's gonna go right out of my head now, some of the ones we came up with. But it like a movie we might do two movies with the same actor or the same director, but we
Yeah.
also might just do something like a little interesting. Like I'll spoil one we haven't covered yet, which is we're gonna cover Pretty Woman coming up pretty soon, hopefully. And I'm thinking American Gigolo is definitely gonna go with that, because it's Richard
Yeah.
Gere and he's also playing a gigolo. So like thematically, like that's right there.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I'm also thinking maybe My Best Friend's Wedding because that's my other favorite Julia Roberts. And then I'm thinking I might go something a little like daring, like Working Girls, which is this '80s movie about what it's actually like to be a prostitute. So
Oh,
this is a
nice.
spoiler for a future episode, by the way. So, but yeah,
You
that's
heard it
just
here
an
first.
example. Yeah, that's an example of how I put it together. I'll just think of like maybe theme, maybe actors, but like something maybe a little different, maybe not the same genre even.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, all of the ones that you just suggested fit in different ways. American Gigolo being sort of the flip side of the dynamic with Richard Gere. And then, like, My Best Friend's Wedding, I think people forget by 97, people were sort of questioning her star power. Pretty Woman came out and she got an Oscar nomination. We're like, all right, we're in the age of Julia Roberts. And then like 95, 96, those movies weren't performing as well. And 97 was like her reclamation of like, oh, no, I run the table on rom-com. And then you had Notting Hill and Runaway Bride and all that
Yeah.
other stuff. But yeah, that's so interesting. Is I know, and I know what I love about your show too is that you apply the term romantic comedy to to different genres. Like we're going to talk about the film we're talking about today, kind of falls into that wheelhouse a little bit,
Yeah,
and I think it's people think romantic comedies and they think a very specific type. She's
sure.
just busy businesswoman working on business, and he's just
Yeah.
too relaxed for his own good. How are they gonna? You think of something like One Fine Day, for example, which is a movie I love, um, and and I feel like there's a lot more to explore in the genre than I think a lot of people give it credit for.
Yeah, we do a lot of series too, and I think the series allow us to think outside the box a little bit. For example, we did a Gen X rom-coms series
Huh.
where we kind of looked at movies that reflected something about the film culture of Gen X or the values of Gen X. So obviously you have like a Reality Bites in there, which is a pretty like obvious romantic comedy. But we also did like She's Gotta Have It from Spike Lee, which functions in many ways as a romantic comedy. And
Yeah.
he was right at the beginning of Gen X. And we put in True Romance just because I wanted to cover a Quentin Tarantino written movie at least,
Right.
right? I mean, obviously it's not totally a rom com, but hey, it's got its
There's
moments. So like,
there's
yeah,
elements of it. Yeah.
yeah. So we
So
just yeah.
So, let me ask you, what is your history with romantic comedies? And then I guess sort of, transitioning into your history with movie musicals. Like, did you grow up with them around you a lot? Is it something you
Yeah.
sort of really kind of fell into later on? What's the story there?
I mean, I grew up with all movies around me because my father, like my mother and father, they were both humanities majors, right? And they were both big film fans and they kind of had brought their own kind of films into the mix. So with my
Mhm.
dad, I'd be watching a lot of older movies and I'd be watching some musicals with him. And with my mom, she liked a lot of period pieces. She watched a lot of romantic comedies like Moonstruck was in my life at a very early age, for example, A Room with a View.
Oh,
My
great movie.
dad brought in like the Mel Brooks, and my dad brought in the Blues Brothers, all kinds of movies, right? But he also brought in musicals. He really liked The Music Man, for example. So that's an early
Yeah.
one I watched. The Sound of Music was a favorite of my mom's, and to this day, The Sound of Music is I will call it my favorite movie because I think it's really hard to
Oh,
pick a
nice.
favorite. I think it's hard to pick a favorite movie for like all seasons, right? But like it's
Right.
kind of the one that is stuck with me throughout my whole life. It's always in the mix, right? So yeah, I love all kinds of movies. My dad had film books, on the wall of our family
That's
room
so
that I would
cool.
just like look through. So, yeah, I don't remember a time when I didn't watch movies basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. Same. And, I think the genre both genres have really had their ups and downs. I would say, like, over the last couple decades. I think, Sound of Music, which you mentioned, something we've covered on this podcast, is actually the title song as part of this movie, which I watching it recently for this episode, I was like, oh yeah, wow, I totally forgot
Yeah.
that's in the stew that is Moulin
Yeah.
Rouge, the Sound of Music. And it's been interesting, like seeing in the last couple years, seeing rom-coms, like at least theatrically, sort of make a little bit of a mini comeback. Regardless of how you feel about the movie, something like Anyone But You
Oh, I
made a
love
lot of
that one
money.
actually. Yeah,
I
I
feel
love
like
that
it's
one.
very divisive among some people. Some people are like, no, not into. I thought it was fun.
Yeah,
I don't.
I
I
have
don't
a
know.
I have a theory about it, and this might not be a
Yeah.
popular theory with some women specifically, but I honestly think Sydney Sweeney's a little too hot, like
Mm,
for rom-com audiences
okay.
to get behind her. She's really hot, okay? And like the
Yeah.
most popular rom-com heroines, I think always make themselves a little more awkward or meek or dorky or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Their
that's one of
hair's
my
always a
theories.
mess. They're always like dropping, like you think of like Sandra Bullock in most of her movies where she's pratfalling all over the place or something.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes it easier to maybe, like, insert yourself into the character if the
Yeah.
woman seems, like, slightly more approachable. So that's one of my theories. I mean, it's not the best written thing ever, like, like, it's not a Moonstruck, it's not Dirty Dancing, it's not When Harry Met Sally, but I just
Right.
don't understand some of the vitriol I've seen aimed at it either. Like, I just think it's really good.
Mm.
Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell are really great together. Like, the director did Friends with Benefits, which is another great, like, fun, sexy rom-com, so I have no
Yeah.
problems
Yeah.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Same. Same. I mean, it's also it's in the age of streaming, all the mid-budgeted stuff, which is all most of the romantic comedies, just went
Yeah.
straight to. So everything is like
Yeah.
a Netflix movie now, and the percentage of rom-coms that actually make it to theaters now is very slim, unless it's like, a rom-com happening within an action movie or a Marvel thing or like
Yeah.
whatever, like rom-com elements within other genres, but like a pure romantic comedy like in Anyone But You, it doesn't really happen to make its way to cinemas anymore, which is a real
Eh,
bummer.
yeah, or DVD, and that's a huge pet peeve of
Yeah.
mine, 'cause I
Yeah.
still use DVDs, I use the library, I would buy some of these movies, like, Prime put
Yeah,
out a
same.
great one, I Want You Back with Jenny Slate and Charlie Day. I think I Want You
Oh,
Back
I
is
need
one
to
of the
see
best
that.
romantic comedies been released in the last 5, 10 years, and you can't get it except if you, like, watch it
Yeah.
on streaming. Same thing with, Always Be My Maybe, that's a fantastic rom-com that not everybody has access to, so that really bugs me, okay? It really that's my
Netflix
pet
is
peeve.
really bad. Netflix like holds these movies hostage. Speaking of Glenn Powell, Set It Up, I think is such a great
Mm.
rom-com with him and Zoe Deutsch, and then more recently Hitman, also with Glenn Powell.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
really interesting, fun movies that you'll never have on physical media, I guess,
yeah.
unless someone like Criterion comes in and depicts, which is not going to happen with that genre,
Well, you never
unfortunately.
know. You never know. Some of the stuff they put on Criterion these days is pretty
That's
out
true.
there, so you never know. Yeah.
Um, so, in your opinion, as the expert on rom coms, uh, first, what makes a good rom com, and how does Moulin Rouge qualify?
Okay, so let's see. What makes I think a lot of different things could make a good rom-com. But for
Yeah.
me, writing and character are like like with any movie for me, writing and character are the most important. If you don't have good writing and if you don't have strong characters, like most things fall apart. Now, the funny thing about that is Moulin Rouge, I wouldn't say their writing and character is all that great in some ways. It's very simple, compared to a
Yeah.
lot of movies. Um, Moulin Rouge works for different reasons, but most rom coms I like snappy writing and I like good characters that like have motivations that are identifiable in some way. When
Right.
Harry Met Sally is one of my top favorites. I mean, that's like a masterclass in writing
That's
right
the
there.
gold. That's like that one in Moonstruck, which you mentioned a couple of
Yes,
times. Those
yes,
are, I think, universally considered like the gold standards for like modern romantic comedies, at least. And
yes.
by
I do
modern, I
like.
mean like, our lifetimes, essentially,
Yeah,
like 80s and forward.
I do like though romantic comedies that have something like a little different about them too. Like so My Best Friend's Wedding, which I also mentioned, has a little bit of a different kind of a heroine and a little bit of different kind of an ending and it's got music in it. So I like when people add a little something to the mix to change it up. I love
Yeah.
horror rom-coms for that reason. Like Happy Death Day to You. I love when you bring another
I love
genre
those.
into the rom-com. So those are all
Hmm.
things I love. But I mean, rom-com is a very personal genre though at the same time. I think horror and rom-com are both really personal genres because they both are getting us on a really emotional and visceral level. Like what
Hmm.
scares one person isn't going to scare another person. Same thing as what makes one person fall in love or swoon
Yeah.
isn't going to make another person fall in love. So that's why you have so many tropes in romance too, like the romance not book genre too. There's all these different tropes, and not every trope's going to appeal to every person. So I mean,
Yeah.
I can tell you what I think makes a good rom com. Another person's going to be like, no, 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 it's this totally different thing. They love the Hallmark stuff, for example. Maybe they love the big city woman goes to the small town. Not my
Right. Right.
thing, but for some people it is, right? Sorry, and you
Yeah.
asked something about Moulin Rouge in there too.
Yeah. How does Moulin Rouge qualify as a rom com? Like, what earmarks do you see in this where you're like, you mentioned, not to spoil the pre recording conversation, but you mentioned this was one you almost considered covering for your own
We
podcast. So what elements of it appeal to you in that regard?
Well, we did a musicals series at one point in our podcast, and so we considered it in the process of doing the musicals series.
Sure.
Ultimately, it got left out because it is a tragedy. That's not even a spoiler. You know, it's going to be a tragedy
Right.
at the beginning of the movie. There are aspects of rom com in it, though. I mean, certainly there is comedy. There's a couple that's very much in love, like and the story is about love. It reminds you of that so many times. Like, so it's really about this idealized, perfect love. It's a very earnest film. It's very effusive. And
Yeah.
Baz Luhrmann, I keep saying it Baz, but it's actually Baz. Baz Luhrmann, he's really does care a lot about that theme too. Like, have you seen Strictly Ballroom?
I
Like his
haven't. I
first
need to go
movie?
back.
Oh
I
my
need to
god,
go back
yes.
and watch that, and I need to. It's been a million years since I've seen Romeo plus Juliet, which are the two other installments in what's kind of become known as the Red Curtain trilogy. So I
Yeah.
really need to go back and revisit those two.
Well, like, honest to God, like, anyone in the audience who hasn't seen Strictly Ballroom, that to me is the best thing Baz Luhrmann has ever done. Okay, like, which is kind of sad because it's his first movie, but
Yeah,
it's such a great movie. Some of the things that make people not like Baz Luhrmann sometimes, like the over the topness, it's
right.
pulled back a little bit with Strictly Ballroom, probably because the budget was lower. Some people,
Hmm.
when their budget is lower, they lean into character a little bit more, right? But yeah, that's another movie that where love is so central, and these ideals and this earnestness is so important, and music is so important. So Baz Luhrmann's really got this great stew of things that make a rom com special within this tragic story. Yeah,
Yeah. It's also, it has the classic sort of misunderstandings. Like she thinks he's
sure.
Satine thinks
Yeah,
Christian is the Duke at one point, and so there's like the classic kind of like, wait, what? I thought you're not who I thought you were, kind of thing going on,
yeah,
which is always a really fun rom com trope that pops up a lot. Like even anyone but
yeah,
you has like a misunderstanding, like, oh wait, you left. I thought that meant you didn't want to be with me, and blah blah blah. And then of course
yeah,
it
yeah.
sorts itself out. Yeah, I love all of that. What about musicals? Did you know how where do you land with musicals in general? Because I have, like, specifically, like, I've discovered about myself, I've had an arc. Like I grew up with certain musicals like West Side Story and things like that, and then as I've gotten older, I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm a musical person. Like it depends on the musical. And then after a while, I'm just like, okay, no, I enjoyed the Mean Girls musical, which a lot of people didn't like, which I get it because it's not great, but I'm still drawn to it. So I'm like, I think I am just and it's into movie musicals. I think I'm just that's a thing I've accepted about myself, but I still bristle a lot of times with jukebox musicals, which this probably
Mm-hmm.
being one of the only exceptions. do
Yeah, yeah,
you do you approach those differently? Because now this I feel like was one of the first like big instances of that kind of
sure,
really hitting the
sure.
mainstream. And then since then, it feels like every other musical is like,
Mm,
based on a successful recording artist, and it's like their hits remixed into either a story about their life or a story that's fictionalized but incorporating a lot of elements of their life. I'm
yeah,
not going to go into the long list of ones that have emerged in the last decade, but it's a lot. And I think
yeah.
this and Mamma Mia and Rock of Ages, like, are ones that are sort of not Rock of Ages the movie, which was poorly received, but ones that have sort of made the leap to the big screen from the stage. So I guess that's a lot of preamble to what are kind of your general thoughts on jukebox musicals?
Okay, you also asked about my thoughts on musicals in general, so maybe I'll
Yes,
loop back to that if I get a chance.
perfect.
But jukebox musicals, yes, I absolutely have very similar thoughts to you about that. I think the thing that Baz Luhrmann gets right here, and the people he's working with musically get right, is that for a jukebox musical to be effective, the songs have to serve the story. And he even
Mm,
points that out in some of his commentary. You can't just throw a bunch of songs in and then, like, well, I guess you can because people do it all the time. But a lot of
yeah,
jukebox musicals, they throw some songs in that they want to put in there, and then they contort the story to kind of vaguely fit around the music,
right.
right? And I can't stand it. Okay. I cannot stand it. Like I grew on Mamma Mia grew on me a little bit when we covered it for the podcast, but like I still am like, and like what Moulin Rouge does, though, is like every song in here feels like it is organic to the story. Okay.
Yeah.
And like, that's what you want. You don't want it to feel like it's out of place or you just shoehorned this number in. Okay. And he does a great, and like, the fact that he pulls from all these different genres too, and sometimes mashes songs together and does medleys, I think it's so
Hmm.
ingenious, and we'll get to that when we cover our lists. One interesting thing which I didn't realize for until I was like doing research for our musical series is that Singing in the Rain was actually a jukebox musical of a sort, because it was
Yeah.
taking,
Yeah.
yeah, songs from those past classical like movies that had come out right after like the talkies like came in, right? So I mean,
Right.
there, yeah, it can be well done. One that I thought was not bad was like Across the Universe, the Beatles movie. That was
Yeah.
pretty well done, I thought, because it does. And the other thing that makes a good jukebox musical is when you do something interesting with the song, where you're not just
Mm-hmm.
having two new people singing it, and they're probably not as good as the ones who sang it before. But when you do something, you change it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So they had a girl singing, a cheerleader singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand" to another girl and across the universe, which made it a
Yep.
little bit different, a unique kind of experience, for example.
That's
So, and
another one that I think
yeah.
sort of gets a mild pass for me as well. I think like the first one I always think of is the film's rendition of "I Want You, She's So Heavy," and it's the poster of Uncle Sam sort of reaching out towards one of the
Mm,
characters. All
yeah.
of that. And I think it does capture a lot of the themes and messaging that the Beatles music was getting to. So it's so visually like visually imaginative, and as
Yeah.
opposed to just kind of straight, like, singing and dancing and things like that. Like there's a lot more going on stylistically in that film as well.
And I will defend a few of the numbers from Rock of Ages. I thought the Any Way You Want It number, where there's all the dancers
Yeah.
at the club, was done really well in that. So that's one I can watch, but it's like half the movie I like and half of it I'm like recoiling from. So
It's kind of cringy. Yeah. It's
yeah.
it's my wife and I saw that in theaters when it came out, and it's since become sort of a guilty pleasure of ours. Like every once in a while she'd be like, "Hey, let's put on Rock of Ages." I'm like, okay. And then we get into I think Tom Cruise is really fun in that movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, some of the numbers are really well done. So yeah, I don't mind it. Like a lot of people really slammed it. Um, I
Yeah.
wouldn't say it's a great movie, but I think it's a fun watch at least, as opposed to this one, which I think is a great movie. Uh,
But, if I can loop
yes,
back really quick though, like
please go for it.
in terms of musicals in general, like I was also raised on certain musicals, so like Singing in the Rain, The Sound of Music, The Music Man, On the Town, another Gene Kelly one, and like I was also raised on show tunes, like tapes of show tune or tapes of
Hmm.
Broadway shows, so like the Julie Andrews My Fair Lady, stuff like that, right? So like
Right.
I like when I watch musicals, I still kind of prefer what's from the golden age of musicals, like the 40s and 50s. And then when
Yeah.
I was getting into our rom-com series on every rom-com, I studied like Busby Berkeley a little bit, and I went into the Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers, and I'm like a big Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers fan now. Like I watched every movie
That's
they
so
did
cool.
together. Top Hat is one of my all-time favorite musicals now. Like I like it's finding out new movies you love in your 40s
Yeah.
is like thrilling. Okay, finding like a new five-star movie when you're like in your 40s is amazing. And I've really started mining basically the 30s, 40s, and 50s now. Like that's my
Yeah.
go-to. That's what I watch a lot of these days, actually.
No, that's a good call. I mean, and to your point about discovering like new great like not new to you classic movies in
Yeah.
your 40s, like when we recorded the Sound of Music episode of this podcast, that was the first time I had seen it, and I
No
had
way.
never been exposed to it as a child, and I always been like, oh, I'll make it to that eventually. But I grew up with Mary Poppins, so it was
Okay,
also
yeah.
like, oh, if everybody has he's either raised on one or the other or both, and I was a Mary Poppins person, and my guest did not care for Mary Poppins, so we kind of went to we had a brief sort of Mary Poppins Sound of Music comparison thing, which I think is just really interesting. How that dichotomy of like when you come to movies, how it shapes your experience and your view on it. So, when did you first see Moulin Rouge? Did you see this in theaters, or is it one
No,
that kind of came to later?
I saw it in
Okay,
theaters. Okay, not only did I see this movie in theaters, but like my friends and I cosplayed. Like we were gonna like because like back in the day, like they would be like, okay, so for example, I have these still that I have from my youth. I have these
nice.
magazine covers. They would like promo these movies to death in the movie magazines and
Yeah.
everything. I had more than this. And so we already knew what the visual style was gonna look like. So we actually went out and got like Victorian era like looking costumes to wear
Oh wow.
to the showing of the movie. I still have my top hat. I should have worn it, but like I had a corset. I had like a skirt I got at some kind of goth store and like these big boots. And my friends all had like their waistcoats and the whole thing, right? We're like literally we were such dorks. We were the only people at the Oriental Theater in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that were dressed up. But the Oriental Theater itself is this really like beautiful old movie palace kind of movie
Yeah.
theater. Like so we fit in pretty well actually. And we got all dressed up to see Moulin Rouge. We all loved it. My friends were like huge Velvet Goldmine fans, so that was like another
Hmm.
Ewan McGregor music movie,
Yeah.
right? So like that's like where they were coming from, and I also liked you and I liked Nicole, so this was like our event. Like this was there was not a more perfect audience for this movie than me and my friends. Like I was into French things. I always wanted to go to Paris. Like I loved
Oh wow.
period
Yeah. It's like
pieces.
a perfect cross section.
Yeah, like Bram Stoker's Dracula was one of my favorite movies, which has a similar opulent visual style and a
Sure
period.
does.
So yeah, the whole thing, right? We were like the perfect audience. We were obsessed. Okay. Yeah.
That's
Sorry. Like,
awesome. No, no. I mean, no, that's a great experience. That's a great story. I think I came to it on VHS because I saw, or DVD, I guess at this point. I was working at the AMC that I still frequent regularly here in Tampa, and I would do like theater checks and pop in. And this is a weird movie to just walk into a random moment. So I would walk in and be like, "Get a can," with the can number, and be like, "I
yeah.
don't know what the hell is going on." And I was, more sheltered when it came to this, like, um, this more unorthodox style of filmmaking, let's say. And I've really come to love this movie. Like, we'll get to the songs later on, but like, and I've seen it a few times over the years. My wife watched it with me for the first time for this podcast,
Oh wow.
and we'd been meaning to watch it together for a long time and never gotten to it. But it's yeah. Did you? I was gonna ask it. How did you feel about Baz Luhrmann's filmmaking style and sort of that kind of kinetic sort
Yeah.
of kinetic and frenetic, I guess. The way he zooms the camera through the Moulin Rouge and the quick cuts and the anachronisms and all of that stuff. I guess, did you bump up against any of that, or were you like, oh, I see exactly where this movie's coming from right off the bat?
Well, I had already seen like both of his previous films, so I was really
Right.
familiar with Baz Luhrmann from Strictly Ballroom, which is a little less, but has some things like it has that cartoonish acting style sometimes, also in Strictly Ballroom occasionally. And then
Yeah. Yeah.
Romeo and Juliet, of course, was just like the same kind of thing, right? Where you just
Yeah.
are immersed immediately into this like madness, right? And yeah, so I was familiar with it, and like I think I really like at that time in my life really liked anything new or different, kind of, and I think my attention span was primed to like deal with all that, right? Like I think as I've gotten a little older, like I like slower movies a lot more now. Like I will watch a Yasujiro Ozu film for God's sakes, like, but I could still respond to it, but like definitely when I was more primed in my 20s, right? For that.
How did you feel about something like Elvis or The Great Gatsby, other
I
latter
need
Luhrmann films?
I need to rewatch both of them. Like I
Yeah.
really like I don't really like the story The Great Gatsby. Like I know I'm like one of the only people like English majors who isn't a big fan of The Great Gatsby. It's just not a story that I really respond to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I
That's fair.
remember thinking that Leonardo DiCaprio was amazing in it, and I've always intended to watch it again. I've also always Leonardo DiCaprio was in it too, or did I just imagine a movie where he was? I'm sorry.
He's in Great Gatsby. Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio is.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, sorry.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was
He
just
plays Gatsby.
Yeah, for a second I was like, "Am I imagining he's in it?" And I'm like, "No, he is. Good, thank you."
If it
Um,
wasn't for that GIF of him with with the champagne glass,
oh
or
yeah, yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'd be
yeah, yeah,
like, oh, okay, yeah, that's him.
yeah. And then so obviously I need to rewatch it because I was like half
Yeah,
unsure about it. And then also I really want to rewatch Elvis. Like I think I don't like them as much as I like the earlier films, but I haven't rewatched them. And I think sometimes some of these films do bear a rewatch. One thing I think Baz
definitely.
Luhrmann's been very consistent about, though, is he gets great performances out of actors or he casts really well. It probably is both, though. Like I
Yeah,
think like it's sometimes hard to see the great performances with all the editing, and that's kind of one of my pet peeves with him. It's like sometimes I think he does a little too much of what he does, but
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but yeah, I think he really like he gets some amazing performances. So yeah, I think they're
Well,
both worth rewatching at some
I think
point.
that's a good segue to talk about the cast of this film a little bit. Like, Ewan McGregor had been in Trainspotting, he'd been in Velvet Goldmine. He was already Obi-Wan Kenobi at this point. So this still feels like a different side of him in a lot of ways, and I feel like was a huge deal for his career at the point, this being such a mainstream
Yeah,
success. Nicole Kidman obviously had been in a million things already at this
yeah,
point, but this was that year that she was also in the others. She was kind of in the awards conversation for both. Ultimately, got nominated for this, which was nominated for, I forget how many Oscars, a bunch of
eight
Oscars, but
eight
yeah,
Oscars.
I think it
Yeah,
won.
yeah.
It won two, I believe, production and
Costume.
costume.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, which as watching it, I was like, I remember this one something. It was probably costume and production design,
yeah, yeah,
and it
yeah.
was. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. How
Yeah, and
can you
Baz
not?
Yeah, Baz Luhrmann's wife, Catherine Martin, who does all that, who did the
Yeah,
costumes, did that. She is a genius, like straight up
absolutely.
genius. Like, love her. Yeah.
What do you how do you feel about Nicole and Ewan's chemistry in this movie? They don't feel like energies you would think would match necessarily, but then when they're on screen together, you're like, no, this works. Like they feel like they have maybe like I don't know. It doesn't feel like a match that anyone other than someone like Baz Luhrmann would have thought of, but it works really well. I think, and you see sort of new facets of both of them as performers.
I honestly, I feel like they are this is peak Ewan McGregor and peak Nicole Kidman in one movie,
Yeah,
in my opinion. Like, I don't mean to be shallow, but I think this is one of the best looking screen pairs I've ever seen in my entire life. They look amazing. They're almost like a part of the production design. They look so good. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like it's they're incandescent, and I think their chemistry is great. I love that Ewan is playing, and I think he's so good at this, playing a character who is earnest and idealistic and romantic. And it's a male archetype we don't really get to see enough of. Like, we get to see a lot of tough, stoic dudes, but we don't often get to see guys who are falling apart, in love, sensitive artists. And yeah,
Hmm.
I'm all for it. I love that from Ewan. Yeah. And Nicole Kidman, she had done Eyes Wide Shut the year before, so she's like, she can do anything, right?
Pretty much.
Um, like, she is iconic here. Like, I'm going to talk about in one of the songs, like, she managed to out icon two different icons somehow. I don't, like, amazing.
It's also I think people maybe now might underestimate the impact that this had on both of their careers. Like I feel like they were both doing, obviously doing really well. Ewan McGregor, I think, was still maybe sort of finding his way as an A-list star, and Nicole had already, as you said, had already been there for a few years at least. I think for her career, I think To Die For was like the very first big one where she stood out as a headline star, but I think you could trace a lot of everything they've done since to these performances, to like this was the moment that really catapulted them into like, oh, brand names, like
Uh,
in
I
a
guess
way that they maybe hadn't been before.
it's hard for me to think of it like that because I was very aware of both of them before the movie
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
like,
well, yeah.
yeah,
But
I was a big
you and
Far
I
and Away.
being aware
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
everyone being aware,
I just don't have a memory for that because my memory is just like I loved Nicole Kidman in Far and
right.
Away when I was, and I loved Ewan McGregor. I liked him in like obscure movies like The Pillow Book and stuff. Like, so, like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like
yeah.
they were already big stars in my world. You know what I mean? But I will
Yeah.
take your word for it because I don't remember the arc of their history that well.
Yeah. No, I think it was a big deal for the two of them. And then to get into the is there anyone well there's a few, but is there anyone specifically you want to shout out from the supporting cast?
Oh
Which
yeah.
this thing, for the fact that it's these two huge stars and it's very much a two-hander with the two of them, what a strong ensemble cast, I think. Kind of propping them up as well.
I mean, Jim Broadbent, you cannot underestimate what he contributes to this movie. Like,
Yeah.
he anchors a few of the musical numbers, and his comic acting is fantastic. I guess I should also give credit to the guy who plays the Duke, Richard Roxburgh. Even
Yeah.
though you can't stand the Duke, but like he does a great job playing a cartoonishly
He sure
evil Duke.
does.
So there you go.
We even get Kylie Minogue as the Green Fairy, sort of that surreal touch that Baz Luhrmann likes to throw in there. John Leguizamo and Jacek Koman as the Argentinian,
Yeah,
who may come up when we do our song rankings.
yeah.
Just it's just a really strong altogether. Like not only the performances and the design of the film, but the music. It's just like, what would you say to people who kind of criticize this film of like, oh, that's just style over substance and that kind of thing, which I think is what gets lobbed as Baz Luhrmann a lot, is that, oh, he's flashy camera work and all of that, but what are his movies actually saying? Would you defend Moulin Rouge to that, and I guess how would you?
I kind of don't bother sometimes to try to defend
Yeah,
because, like, it's like a very, like, it is in some ways an acquired taste and a taste that's not going to be for everybody. Like,
sure.
Baz Luhrmann himself will say that this isn't meant to be naturalistic. It's meant to be theatrical.
Right.
It's meant to be heightened, right? And so he's trying to present a very specific thing. I mean, you're not going to convince somebody who doesn't want to watch freaky stuff that they're going to like John Waters, right? So you're probably not going
Right.
to convince somebody who doesn't like theatricality that they're going to like Baz Luhrmann. The closest would be to go back to Strictly Ballroom, which like strips that down a little bit.
Yeah.
But I guess I would say in defense though, it is hard to make style that good. Okay, so
It's very true.
even if you don't want to watch it, it's not your taste. You have to respect the artistry involved in this. It's like every every shot is meticulously done to put you into a different universe. It is beautiful to look at, and I can see how I sometimes myself feel slightly distanced from the story by how much editing is going on and how much there is to look at. But it is a feast. It's a visual feast. And like that's not what everyone wants when they see a movie. And I understand
Yeah.
that. But yeah.
It's also, I think, tonally juggling a lot because there's the romance, there's the sort of psychedelic elements of it, there's the comedy. We get kind of a classic meet cute vibe going on with their first meeting. Then there's a lot of tragedy involved. There's a lot of there's a lot going on, and it's incredibly silly at times, which again we might get to when we get to our songs. It's a real soup of influences, and the fact that he his the whole mission is to not only convey that the 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 slogan of the film, the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return, but also sort of capture the like energy of the bohemian lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I one thing that I thought was really interesting in my research is that he often talks about like how using the anachronistic music and putting it in the mouth of Christian makes him feel like ahead of his time in this
Yeah.
world, and makes it more heightens the fact that, oh, what's happening at the Moulin Rouge, what the Bohemians are into, they're like leagues beyond what everyone else is doing. Like
Yeah.
everyone's playing checkers and they're on like three-dimensional chess at this point. And so I find that a really fascinating sort of creative decision to justify, the crowd at the Moulin Rouge singing Nirvana, for example, or as the soundtrack number one, like that whole summer, Lady Marmalade,
Yeah.
which plays in that in that number as part of a medley, I think, at the Moulin Rouge. All of that, I think, it's just it's very unique. It's one of the only musicals we've covered in this sort of movie musical series that I'm doing that was a film first and not a stage production that
Hmm.
got adapted to film. It has since been adapted into a stage musical that debuted in Boston in 2018 and was on Broadway the following year. So I think that also says a lot about the longevity of this film and this story. I haven't done a lot of digging into the musical itself, but
Yeah.
it
I have.
the stage musical, but it seems like they add even more recent music and stuff. So I'll have
Oh wow.
to post this conversation, give a listen to that soundtrack, and see kind of if I can imagine how that adaptation works. But yeah, is there a particular moment or character or line of dialogue that you particularly resonate with?
I
Because there's
think
so many.
it would probably be better if I save that for my top 6 because
Oh,
honestly,
okay,
a
there you
lot of
go.
them are in the top 6, so I don't wanna, like, step on that right now, if you know
I
what I
think
mean.
I think that's a perfect transition. So obviously this thing is wall to wall music. Like if you look at the list of songs that were sampled in this movie, it is vastly outnumbers the number of musical numbers in this movie because
Yeah.
they are, like we said, there's so many pastiches, there's so many medleys in this film. But let's talk about Six. Let's talk about Six, baby. Let's talk about flicks and me. Let's talk about what the good films and the bad films are to me. Let's talk about Six. Let's talk about Six. So, Jen, what do you have for your number 6?
Okay, oh, okay, number 6, we're gonna start at
We got to
the
build up to
other
it.
end. Yeah, okay, sorry, I had it in reverse order. So, yeah, so what before I start my list, I just wanna say really quick that, like,
Yeah.
this isn't like you said, a lot of these are pastiches and medleys, so it presents an interesting kind of problem. in terms of like separating them out. Like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
musicals, there's a beginning and an end to the number. In this one, there's numbers that have numbers inside of them, right? So it's kind of
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
separating them out was very difficult. Another thing, and I hope I'm allowed to do this. At the end of my top six, I want to shout out two songs that I love from the soundtrack rather than from the actual
Oh
movie.
yeah, that's a
Because I
good
have
call.
both. There were two soundtracks released. I had both of them. I probably know the music better from the soundtrack albums than I do from the movie at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
And there's different versions too.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that are on this like the same song but different a different rendition by a different artist and all of
Okay.
that.
So with all that preamble out of the way, I guess my first, the number six for me would be Hindi Sad Diamonds, which is like pretty much all the way at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
It is a blend of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend with this Hindi song called Chama Chama. It is when you see Spectacular Spectacular is ending at the Moulin Rouge. You see the play on the stage, and everybody's assembled in this like Bollywood like dance number. It's really intricate. It reminds me a lot of like a Busby Berkeley number where they'd have people's bodies almost just as props in a way. They're just meant
Yeah.
to produce an interesting composition. And of course, it's got that Bollywood element, so it's blending all these interesting things. I'm sure it also like harkens to like Baz Luhrmann started as a theater person, so this is him showing you a theatrical production. So there's a lot I like about it, but one thing you were talking about, what are specific scenes that stick out?
Yeah.
There's this moment where, okay, Nicole Kidman's character Satine is playing a character in a play, okay, and she
I'm
is
a
a
sucker for the meta narratives. I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know
it
if
is.
you are.
Dude, okay, yeah. Wait, actually, before I even say that, sorry, we're gonna go meta here because this is a movie that puts you into a theater curtain, and then it puts you into a different movie where somebody's writing a book about his life, where they're also writing a play. So yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so here we have Satine, and she's playing this courtesan in India, and she's in love with this penniless sitar player. But at the end of the musical, that's been revised to make the Duke happy, she ends up with the evil Maharaja, right? And like
Right.
she's doing this diamonds are a girl's best friend Hindi mashup, and she's lit all in blue, and you see the diamonds sparkling off of like this headdress she's wearing, and it makes this really beautiful composition cinematically speaking, but so sad, so much pathos in that moment. And like
Yeah.
that's why I'm choosing it as number six, because it works so well in the film to create this sad mood, and but it looks gorgeous at the same time. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, that's a great pick. I love anytime a story has a story within itself where they sort of bleed together the story that you're watching and the story that they're telling.
Yeah.
I love, and all of that stuff is just, again, it's the English major in me. I think that's just like, oh, they're like deconstructing the elements of storytelling of the own. They're referencing this story that they're in the other story that they're telling, where she has
Right.
that moment where she breaks Christian's heart and she's like, I choose the Maharaja. I love when they sort of bleed into each other in that way, and I think that's a great example of that happening. I went a much a much different direction with my number six. So I had a couple of honorable mentions, which maybe I'll get to at the end. And I'll just be like, I wanted to put these, but I didn't make them. They didn't make it. I I am always surprised by how much I enjoy Like a Virgin. I think this number is just, it's the broadest comedy moment of the film for me. And Harold Sidler, like you said, Jim Broadbent is so much fun in this movie. And he's a borderline villainous character at times, but then
Mhm.
he's got such a soft spot for Satine. So it's like you never know which way he's going um, which way his is going to align.
Yeah.
And the way the way it turns from him singing Madonna's Like a Virgin to the Duke to try and convince him how true Satine is to him, and then halfway through it flips and Richard Roxburgh like breaks the fourth wall and engages with us directly, and then sort of stalks uh
Yeah. Yeah.
Harold, and he's like running away, like looking behind him, and
Yeah,
he's
and
like
he's
all
like
the like universal monster posing happening where he's like, I think my wife, I don't think she was feeling it as much, but I was just sitting there laughing the whole time. He's on the table standing and it's like the wind in his
yeah.
face and he's like screaming and stuff. So funny, so good. It's again an example of how is this movie able to put something like this in here and it works and it fits with the story that's being told. And yet, the more outlandish these characters act, the more invested I am. That in most movies, that should be the scene that like breaks you, where you're like, I don't know, I can't take any of this seriously. But then 5 minutes later, you're feeling for Satine and Christian again. So it's like, it's a miracle that that sequence works as well as it does. And I find those two actors just so funny, in the choreography, and that is hilarious.
Yeah, that was my honorable mention, and the only reason
Oh,
it's an
great.
honorable mention, the only reason it would be an honorable mention only is because I think it's one of the only songs you could take out of the movie and the movie
Yeah.
would still work as a story. But yeah, it's very comedic. It's the acting in it is hilarious. I'm sure like it would have gotten left in no matter what because of the way those two actors played off each other.
Right. So funny. What's your number five?
So my number five, like, is and this is like I'm not super enthusiastic about it because it's not really a traditional musical number. It's more of like a laid over montage. But I like the song a lot. I think some people would find it cheesy, but it's "Come What May," and "Come What May" is the only original song that was written for this movie. Unfortunately, it was not able to be nominated for an Oscar because it had, I guess, been written for Romeo and Juliet and then not used. So
Oh, okay.
bummer, Oscar. I don't like it
Yeah.
anyway.
I don't
But
like that.
it was written by David Bearwald and arranged by Craig Armstrong. I think it is a beautiful love song, very earnest love ballad. Some people aren't going to like that, but I know all the words. I could sing it right now. I won't alarm you. Um, but I think the reason it's in my list is that I'm not the way it's presented in the movie is more like a montage, so it's not like anything
Yeah.
super special. But like anytime you look at Ewan McGregor singing this, if you are somebody who's attracted to men, I defy you to not be like, oh, like he looks so romantic and so gorgeous and like beautiful, beautiful. Nicole Kidman looks gorgeous too, but like Ewan McGregor has never looked more appealing than he looks singing this song to Nicole Kidman. So "Come
Yeah.
What May"
It's
is in
like,
there.
I'll second what you said earlier. It's two beautiful people like at the height of their powers, essentially.
Yeah.
And like cross the intersecting at the exact right moment for both of them, I think. But we might hear more about Come What May later
Okay.
on my list. Number five, I have One Day I'll Fly Away. I've
Okay.
spoken previously on this podcast about how much I love the earnestness of an I Want song. The Wizard and I from Wicked, or whatever, any song where a character really strips away all of their artifice. And in this film, Satine has multiple sort of personas that she
Yeah.
embodies based on who she's with. That's kind of her job at the Moulin Rouge. And have seeing all that kind of dropping away, and the vulnerability that Nicole brings to that moment, and her just you know, uh, expressing her desire to leave the Moulin Rouge to become a real actress, which they establish like right in her first scene as sort of her stakes, that what her goal is within everything. I just think it's a beautiful number, and I think Nicole Kidman, who had never, I don't think, ever really sung on screen before, like at least not in such a prominent way. I
Yeah.
think she nails the vocals, and she just brings so much to this character.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the remix of it too? That's on the number two soundtrack. Like
I
it's really
probably have, because I've heard
yeah.
both of those soundtracks a lot, and I've kind of gone back when I was formulating this list and kind of listening to specific tracks to be like, yeah, that's got to be on there or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely have to go back and check that out again. Yeah,
Yeah, the remix on the number 2 soundtrack, I really like the version that version of the song. It's not my favorite, like, in this list, but I don't there's not a song in this that I don't like, though. So,
yeah,
let me get this straight. Just because it's not on my top 6, I like all the songs. I think all of them work, so
right. Yeah, there's no musical numbers in here where it's like a built-in bathroom break or anything. You're like you're engaged the whole time, I
Yeah.
think. What do you have for number four?
Yeah, so Elephant Love Medley is my number 4, and the reason I really like Elephant Love Medley is because it's so much fun, like, honestly, just being like, "Oh, that song, that song, that song," like, just catching all the different songs that they're putting in there. Also, I love a seduction scene. You like an I want scene, I like a seduction scene. So this is really when Ewan starts his seduction with your song, but then he's
Mm-hmm.
continuing it, and it's a dialogue now with Nicole Kidman and Elephant Love Medley, where he's being like, we should be lovers. She's like, we can't do that, right? And they're going back
Yeah.
and forth with different songs, like I was made for loving you, all these different things. I love this song. And then they end with like stuff like I will always love you. They're spinning
The
around.
fireworks in the
Yeah.
background.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
moon starts singing. It's a
The moon's inspired. I don't blame him.
yeah, it's I can't even say enough about why I like this. Like when I listen to this one on the soundtrack divorced from the movie, it doesn't work
Yeah.
as well for me. But when I watch it within the context of the movie and the dynamic visuals on that elephant that they built an actual elephant, and there was an
Yeah.
elephant at the Moulin Rouge, which functioned as a nightclub, by the way.
Nice.
So yeah, so when it's in the movie, I think it works super well. So yeah.
Yeah. There's also fun little moments where it almost sounds like he's gonna start talking, and then he
Yeah.
he's like, "Don't leave me this way," things like that,
Yeah.
where you're like, "Oh, nice." Yeah, but it's really fun just to spot all the little references throughout. Number
One
4. Oh,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry. One thing I wanted to say about that, though, is I wonder how if you could do that today in a movie, because we
Yeah,
used to come from a culture where we would, like, listen to the same music. We'd listen to the radio, we'd watch MTV, and we'd have kind of the same, sources of music. Now I think it's a lot more dispersed, so I'm wondering if, like, you could even do that in a movie and people would be like, "I know that one, I know that one." Like,
right.
anyway,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
just an aside.
it was more of a monoculture back in the day, prior to everything kind of explode, like the massive
Yeah,
content that we have
yeah.
now. Um, Also, well, I'll talk about it in a minute because we might not be done with the Elephant Love medley, I guess
Okay.
is what I'm saying. For my number 4, I have The Pitch, aka Spectacular
Yeah.
Spectacular.
That's my
This is
number
another one.
3. Yeah,
Oh, perfect.
so we can just I'll go in after you, and I'll
I
clean
had
up the
Elephant
spot.
Love medley at number 3, so we can
Alright.
kind of breeze through these. Um, so no, I love this scene. I think it's a genius way of sort of laying out exposition
Mhm.
for the play that they're putting on, but also the movie you're watching, where to the point where the Duke is like, and in the end, should someone die? Um,
Yeah,
everybody at the top of their game. You can see like the Christian and Satine have chemistry. They're clearly into each other, but there's like they're kind of standoffish about it. But they're like locking eyes across the room. Again, Jim Brown. Like it's the full ensemble on display, and it's that classic Baz Luhrmann sort of like frantic camera movements and high energy, and it's just so much fun to listen to, but especially to watch, obviously. It's yeah. I think it's also we get the Duke saying it's a little bit funny. It's a little
yeah,
bit funny. This feeling inside, and he does that like crazy faces. It's so funny.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on The Pitch?
Well, one of the things I love about it too is this is one that brings in music from the time. So this brings in the
Yeah.
Can Can by Jacques Offenbach. This whole thing is set to it. So exciting, it will
Yes.
run for 50. No, wait, no. So exciting, the audience will stomp and cheer. So delighting, it will run for 50 years. Yeah, you've broken me out now, so I have to like spectacular, spectacular, no words in the vernacular. I also like a song that has a lot of wordiness to it, like those
Yeah.
songs like Modern Major General from like a Pirates of Penzance or something. I love when there's a lot of wordiness to a song. So that's one of the
Yeah.
things I love about this. But yeah, you're right too with the frenetic energy, and he has like the sped up shots of like Zidler running around like or people getting props on together.
And
They're
he,
great.
he does the. I don't know if he's making the sound or if they added it, but he's like,
Yeah.
he's like, he like spins and it does the like.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Every-
It makes me laugh. There's even jokes built into that scene, like dialogue where she's like, Satine says, "Oh, Harold, no one could play him like you could. No one's going to."
That's
And then
right.
they
Yeah.
back to the song. All of that. It's just yeah. It's definitely a standout. Um,
Yeah, it's almost making me want to move it to number 1. Like the more we talk about it, I'm
it's
like, should it have been higher?
it kind of it slowly moved its way up to number 4, and I could have put it higher, but obviously I have 3 songs more a little bit higher than it. At number 3, I had, like I said, Elephant Love medley. Everything you just said, I think it's one of the most visually, it's probably the most I would say probably the most well-known sequence from the movie. It's the one that they've parodied on
Yeah.
SNL
Yeah.
a couple times, where the joke was, I don't know if you've seen the sketch, but there's a sketch with Bowen Yang and Ariana Grande, and the joke is that they didn't know what songs they were going to have the rights to, so they kept reverting back to Happy Birthday. So they're like singing like I will always love you, happy birthday. Like and I think it speaks to the fact that this movie, that's probably the most, it's probably the time warp of this movie. Like, as if you've never seen Rocky Horror, you know the time warp sequence. If
Yeah.
you've never seen Moulin Rouge, you at least know about this scene inside, on top of the elephant with these two singing a medley of classic pop songs. And I
Yeah.
just think it's the falling in love moment too. And it's a movie about love, and this is the moment where they decide to, to be together, at least for the time being. So yeah, it was definitely always going to be pretty high on my list.
Nice. Nice.
What did you have at number
What
two?
number? We're at number 2 now. Okay, good. I was like, where are we
Yeah,
now? Okay. So for number 2, I have Sparkling Diamonds. It's called on the soundtrack, or Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. So that's
right.
originally written by Jewel Stein and Leo Robin. Now, one of the coolest things about this is that there's like okay, so this was originally in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes with Marilyn Monroe, and then Madonna did her Material Girl video based on Gentlemen Prefer Blondes,
Yep.
and then in this version they insert a little bit of Material Girl into that. So if you know, you know that they're
Mm-hmm.
calling up not only the iconic Marilyn Monroe but the iconic Madonna. And
Yeah.
Nicole Kidman somehow manages to measure up to both of these icons. Like, part of it is the way her entrance comes in. So this comes in after the introduction to the Moulin Rouge, when everything's been really sped up and lots of cuts and everything's colorful and everything's loud. And then all of a sudden the movie goes almost silent. There's like a hush in the air. The color scheme goes from multicolored to like this black and white and silver like sequins rain down from the ceiling. And then you get a close up on Nicole Kidman's face. Her perfect
Mm-hmm.
face looks like a classic movie idol. And she descends into the audience on a trapeze wearing a black and silver sparkled corset with like a tail, and your breath is taken away. And in fact, in the movie, in the narrative, Christian's breath, he literally goes, he gasps. And that's like the
Yeah.
reaction you as an audience have too. And it is just a brilliant way to introduce her character. The rest of the number I like too. Her, like, you don't have to do a lot of dancing for this. And the singing, the range is not actually that difficult, but you have to pull off the presence and the persona, and she does that and more. She lives up to two of the biggest icons we've ever had in pop culture history in this performance, and takes your breath away. And it's such a smart song to use too, because obviously this is a movie about choosing love or choosing money, and
Yeah.
that's what the song's about. So bravo, like, genius. This is one of the two in this movie, this and my number one, that I consider to be genius level.
Yeah. No, that was an honorable mention for me. Sparkling Diamonds. The fact that, and it starts on her face with just a spoken word, the French are glad to die for love, and then the beat kicks
Yeah.
in and all of that. Yeah, and it's her owning the space. Like, this is, you have to immediately establish she is the star of the Moulin Rouge, why she's the star of the Moulin
Yeah.
Rouge, what what her objective is. Like I said, to be a real actress, they established in this number, amidst everything else, how she takes control of that crowd and is immediately like, come and get me, boys, and got everyone chasing her, and
Yeah.
how smart she is, that she's doing what she's doing, but she's well aware, and she's very strategic, and she's she's not just blindly going through this situation being exploited by Harold or anything. There's a sort of a partnership happening there, and she's doing everything is sort of done intentionally on her part to try and achieve a certain goal. So I find that it really reveals a lot about her character amidst everything else, amidst all the
Yeah.
singing and trapezing and all of this that's going on.
And you're also setting up the plot where there's going to be the mistaken identity at the same time. And even amidst all
Thank you.
that, yeah, there's even time for an outfit change too. So she emerges
Yeah.
in one gorgeous outfit, then she shows up in a second gorgeous outfit at the end of the number in this like pink corset with sparkling like jewels and a pink feather tail. And it's like, wow, like for visual pleasure, like this is just a feast right here.
Hence the costume design Oscar, which was well
Yeah.
deserved.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's incredible. My number two, and now I'm like, should I bump it to number one? It could easily get to number one. Is El Tango de Roxanne.
Yeah, that's my number
Like,
one. That's
so, it's so good. It's
yeah.
the we've been alluding to the fact that this is kind of a rom com, but also goes to very dark places. Not only with the death of Satine, spoilers for a almost 25-year
I
old
mean, it's
movie.
at the beginning of the movie too. Like it's
It
right at the
is.
beginning of the
It
movie.
is. It's true. There's also a joke in the SNL sketch where she coughs on the hanky and there's a little bit of blood, and Bowen Yang is like, "Oh no, you've coughed blood. That's movie for dying," or whatever, which is essentially what it is. But then this sequence where the Duke attempts to rape her,
Yeah.
essentially, and so there's the drama of her, intending to sleep with the Duke as she's been sort of leading him on the whole movie. There's Christian sort of grappling with that realization and his jealousy, and then there's the Argentinian sort of vocalizing that and putting Christian's emotions into motion, essentially. Uh, it's just so well orchestrated. The way it builds with the Argentinian starting off with the vocals, and then Ewan McGregor's Christian kind of coming in there, and the way the emotion, as it's the most emotionally intense
Yeah.
moment of the film. And honestly, of all these songs, it's probably the one that's been in my head the most the last couple of days since I watched it for this podcast.
Yeah.
And it's so good. So what's your number one? So
Yeah,
I guess
it's
expound on that.
yeah, no, it's my number one. And like the main reason it's my number one is because, like I said, in a jukebox musical, what I like it to do is to do something new with the song. And I
Yes,
think this is the place where the song has been transformed the
thousand
most.
percent.
It meets the theme completely. It builds the drama, it builds the momentum of the story, it builds the characters. But then it also takes a song that we all know, everybody knows Roxanne, and it makes it into something totally new and totally different by adding this tango element to it. I guess like one of the tangos that was added to it was called Tanguera by Mariano Mores. I listened to that a little bit. It seems like that provided like the melody where Ewan's singing and adding the additional lyrics to it. Um, Also, like when you see Strictly Ballroom, you'll see that Baz Luhrmann has this history with ballroom dances and traditional dances. So putting a tango in there really works to his strengths too, like bringing in this more traditional dance element. And I think
Yeah,
it's one of the best dance scenes in the movie. Like
absolutely.
I like a lot of the musicals that have really good dancing with like Gene Kelly or Fred Astaire, right? So like seeing this dance element is really delightful to me. I watched the extended version of this where you can see a little bit more of the dancing on the DVD to prepare
Oh,
for this
cool.
too, and that was awesome. Just they're so talented. Caroline O'Connor, I guess, is the name of the person playing Nene Legs in the Air. That's an actual
Yeah,
name of somebody who works at the Moulin Rouge, and she's great in this scene. Like she only gets a little bit of snippy aside in the rest of the movie, but here she really gets to shine with her dancing talent. And as you mentioned, I think it's pronounced Jacek Coleman,
yeah, I
the
think
the
so. Yeah,
the Argentinian, and they're so good together. They're so dynamic. They're not the leads of the movie, but it doesn't matter. You're just
yeah,
like riveted by them. And then of course Ewan and it is a little awkward having an attempted rape put into the middle of this.
yeah,
That it's not successful takes that away, like that he is not successful, like makes it a little easier, but that is
yeah.
hard, like,
It
like
is.
to watch. But it's the song itself is just integrated into this movie with such genius, and it's made me think. What it's done is it's made me think about that song in a different way, a song that
Yeah,
I'd known for years, decades before I saw this movie, and now it's like a new song to me. So like that, when you can do that with such a popular song, you've really done something.
yeah. No, it completely recontextualizes it. Um, it's a great. I kind of want to watch it now. After we're done, I'm gonna watch that. That will be the sequence I would rewatch.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like, uh, for its function in the film and the structure and the way that the song is arranged and everything, it's the boldest, I think, number in this jukebox musical in a lot of ways. At number one, I did have "Come What May."
All right.
because everything you said, a classic love song. It's one of it's is it the only original, or
It
it's one of
is.
the only,
It
it's the only
actually
one.
is. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I had to look up some of the other ones, like, One Day I'll Fly Away, I guess, was a different song. I've never heard of it before, but it
Huh.
was. So, yeah.
Okay. So I give it points for that, for being an original song. I think the function that it has within the story, obviously, they're talking about, well, maybe we can't be together, but we'll put this scene in the play so
Yeah.
that the penniless sitar player and the courtesan have this secret love language, that it's like their way of saying, professing their love without anybody knowing, and that playing out later on in the movie when he's like about to walk out, and then they sing it again in front of everyone. Like, I love me I love me a song that re, is reprised throughout the
Sure.
production. And once it's introduced, it's like an ongoing through line throughout this film, and it's in a lot of ways the anthem of the movie, because it is, and because it is emblematic of the love that that Christian and Satine have, because it plays so beautifully into the story, because their vocals are incredible on it,
Yeah.
and it's just such a lush and gentle, but also powerful song, that like it's like when I listen to it, I get a little emotional because it's such a beautiful song.
Yeah.
And I think the way, if it was just a beautiful song and it didn't have any major impact on the movie, maybe I wouldn't have ranked it so high. But because of the way that it plays into the story, it just, I give it a little extra boost. But it's like a razor's edge with the with Roxanne. It's
Yeah.
like it's close. Like they both scratch very different itches. Like if I want something very like a beautiful love song, I'll listen to Come What May. But if I want something that's like bold and like Roxanne, like the vocals that he puts into it, incredible.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
guess any other thoughts on Come Up May, or any of the other songs? What were some of your honorable mentions?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I do wanna
Yeah,
shout out
yeah, the soundtracks.
yeah, I wanna shout out 2 songs that like, if we were making a list that was, like, just considering them as a song and not as how they appear in the movie, I would have 2 more, and the first one you barely hear in the movie, it's called Complainte de la Butte, performed by Rufus Wainwright, who was doing a lot of soundtrack work at the time, and I love Rufus Wainwright anyway, but it was originally written by Jean Renoir for his 1955 film French Can-Can, which for some reason I still haven't seen, but I love this song. It's in French and it's specifically about the Moulin Rouge. And you hear it a little bit when Christian's coming in on the train to Paris. It's like Les escaliers de la butte sont durs miséreux, les ailes des moulins
Oh
protègent
yeah,
les
what's that? That
amoureux.
sounds familiar.
Yeah, I know a lot. I know the whole song in French because I used to study French, and then I had the delight of getting to sing it in a restaurant in France. There's this
Oh
restaurant
wow.
in France called Le Vieux Belleville, where there's a person who plays the accordion and everyone sings like as they eat dinner or after dinner. And
Uh huh.
she was taking requests, and I requested that, and I got to sing it in France, and it was like the highlight of my
Oh wow,
vacation.
that's so
So like
cool.
I love that song. It's a beautiful song. Rufus Wainwright is a great vocalist, and totally check it out if you get a chance. Complaint de la Butte.
Absolutely.
And then Lady Marmalade. I mean, you barely hear it in the movie. I mean, you like
Yeah.
it gets buried kind of like by Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I'm kind of not complaining because that Smells Like Teen Spirit is an epic needle drop in a movie at that
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
Like to get the rights to that, I mean, come on. But like Lady Marmalade, the video was great. That used to be a karaoke song for me and like 3 of my lady friends. We would like sing that at karaoke, sometimes with our top hats. So
Nice.
yeah, like fantastic vocals on that and great arrangement. And yeah, so I just want to shout out those 2. And
Yeah.
sorry if I sang too much. Like I don't mean to be a huge dork, but you sang, so I
We're
decided I.
talking about musicals.
All
It's a
right.
kind of goes with the territory. Yeah, no, those are good picks. For me, the honorable mentions that I mentioned, Sparkling Diamonds. I really wanted to put your song in there,
Oh yeah.
but because it was sort of a direct cover, I was
Yeah.
less. I wanted to sort of highlight the more creative applications of the songs in the movie, since it is a jukebox musical. And then for a similar reason, The Show Must Go On, I thought was
Oh yeah, yeah.
is a if we were doing a top 8, or top 9, those would have been some of my other ones.
Yeah, that Show Must Go On is such a good shout out, and
Yeah.
especially when you consider Freddie Mercury, like, writing that
Yes.
song as he's
100%.
dying, and then it's just like knowing the context of that song adds so much to its place in the story. Yeah,
Absolutely.
genius, yeah.
And when I first saw it, like I recognized the song, but I wasn't one of those Queen songs that I had heard a lot growing up. So it wasn't until after this movie that I was like, oh, that was a Queen. Oh my gosh. And then I learned the story
Yeah,
behind it, and like it's really adds a whole new dimension
yeah.
to its use here. Is there anything about Moulin Rouge, the film, the music, that we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure we brought up before we start wrapping up the show?
Let me see. I do have a section in my outline called random notes, which I may or may not even care. Um, I guess like I guess like no, I'm not even going to nitpick. Like I had a few tiny nitpicks, but I don't care anymore. I've talked myself into loving the movie more through podcasting,
Right?
which is
That's
something that
the beauty of
frequently
podcasting.
happens to me. Yeah, does it happen
Same.
to you too? Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Like, well, I'll cover something I've seen maybe once before and I thought it was fine, but then I watched it with a closer eye for the podcast and then was like, okay, I guess I see where it's coming from. By the end of the conversation, I'm like, okay, I need to pre-order that. I need to order that on Blu-ray. Like Fiddler on the Roof, which we covered on this podcast, it was around when I was a kid, but I didn't really connect with it. It's not really, I think it's harder for kids to connect with that story specifically in a lot of ways. And then I saw it as an adult a few years ago and I thought it was good. Then I watched it, for this episode, and I was like, wow, I'm surprised how much I'm vibing
Yeah.
with Tevye right now. Like, so I own it on Blu-ray now.
Yeah.
For people who've heard that episode, and I think I mentioned it there, that I need to get it now. I own it. I own Fiddler on the Roof. I own The Sound of Music now. So because I have a physical media
Yeah.
problem.
Well, promise me you'll watch Strictly Ballroom at some point.
I will.
Because it's like
I will.
really good, really good.
And that's the other thing. Usually I'll end these episodes asking for like a recommendation, blah, blah, blah. In your case, I was going to ask about a double feature, but it sounds like Strictly Ballroom would be the one
Yeah.
to pair with this.
Yeah, like, and I'm gonna go eventually find French Can just because I want to see, because I think it was an inspiration in some ways for the movie, so I want to check that one out.
Yeah.
Also, because I'm in an old movie phase, so yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It's perfect. Lean into it. So we'll have to have you back on one of the. I know I mentioned the Mel Brooks thing a million years ago, and I
Oh
still
yeah.
want to do that, and I still have you marked on that spreadsheet somewhere. So
Oh,
when
watch
I
out.
come back around,
Watch
when
out.
I come back around, we'll get that.
Because if you have me on that episode, I might do part of my rendition of "I'm Tired" because I learned how to
Oh, I
sing that
love it.
song when I was 8 years old, which is totally inappropriate. But there
Yeah,
you
it
go.
is. I have an 8-year-old, and I'm like, she's not watching Blazing Saddles for a while. Um, anyway, thank you so much, Jen, for coming on to discuss
Yeah.
Moulin Rouge. Moulin Rouge exclamation point, I should
Yeah.
emphasize. Gotta love when a movie title throws some punctuation in there for
Right.
emphasis.
Yeah.
Tell the people where they can find you and every
Oh, sure.
rom-com on social media.
Yeah, oh, now I have to look this up again because I had to change some of the things. But yeah, we are at everyromcom.com if you just want like our website. And somewhere on my thing, I have where we find other places. Sorry. Okay. Our Facebook page is Every Romcom Podcast and Blog. Our Instagram is at Every Romcom. This is the one that's tricky. Our Twitter handle is at Every Romcom Pod. You have to add the POD at the end. And we're also on Blue Sky at Every Romcom. So we got the
Nice.
bases a little bit covered there.
Yeah.
I try to be interactive. I'm most interactive probably on Twitter, although that place is kind of becoming a wasteland these days. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. But yeah, feel free to email us also at feedback@everyromcom.com if you want to just say hey. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Of course. This has been it's been a long time coming. I've been meaning to have you on the show. Meanwhile, people can find more episodes of this show wherever you get your podcasts and on crookedtable.com. Show your support on Patreon at patreon.com/crookedtable. We're also on YouTube, where I post the video versions of these conversations and a whole lot more. If you want to keep up with us on social media, that'll be at Crooked Table on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads. I'm off of Twitter as of a couple months ago, which feels weird, but I feel like I'm on the right side of history, so we'll roll with that. We'll be back next episode with another movie musical. But for now, that's a wrap on another Crooked Table production. Keep watching, everybody.